So I went home and I looked up companies, and this one was strictly medicinal, was Horizon. I started looking up and I started ordering seeds to see if I could grow some stuff. And yes, indeed, I could. So I started growing quite a few herbs. And yep, I do like making remedies. I do like, doing all the makey stuff too. But I really like growing plants. And well, growing plants has become a passion of mine and kind of my niche in the herbal world. And it's something in which I have been relatively successful. So tonight, I want to encourage you to think about 3 things. You too can grow plants that attract and support pollinators, that are useful for herbal remedies, and that enhance the beauty of any landscape. So first, let's talk about the birds and the bees. No, not that talk. I'm referring to pollinators and the process of pollination. Now, a plant does have both male and female parts. Pollination brings these cells from these parts together. And then the plant can make seeds in the ovaries. So, okay, that does sound a little bit like that birds and bees talk, but we're talking flowers. Pollination is the first step in a process to produce the seeds that produce the next generation of plants. Pretty simple. That are, of course, those plants are important to those of us herbalists as medicine. And yes, wind and water can distribute pollen, but most of the work is done by pollinators. As the little critters move from plant to plant seeking nectar, they carry pollen on their bodies that allows the passive transfer of genetic material critical to the reproductive success of most of our flowering plants. Now, a couple summers ago, I have this is going to be a great idea for all of you with kids. A couple summers ago, I introduced a group of kids to medicinal herbs with a program we started called Dandelion Club in honor of my favorite herbal plant, the dandelion. After sharing a picture of a bee covered in sticky pollen like this one, we did a hands-on demo as each kid dipped their hand into a bag of Cheetos. The sticky Cheeto dust is a fabulous illustration of passive pollination. Use that with your dandelion clubs. So why is the work of pollinators so important? Well, somewhere between 75% and 95% of all flowering plants on Earth need help with pollination. They need pollinators. You have likely heard that 1 out of every 3 bites of food you eat is there because of pollinators, including cacao. Chocolate, just saying. So chocolate, herbs for medicine. Yep, pollinators are a big deal. Okay, I need to share just a few interesting tidbits I learned while researching pollinators. Almost as much as growing plants, I love researching. So these are things I learned when I was researching. Have you ever heard of pollination syndromes? Oh, fascinating. I work with special needs kids, so I had a whole different idea, but this is not the same. This was a new term for me, which I found interesting. I knew from simple observation that certain insects favor certain plants, but I didn't know that this had an official geeky name that you too can share at your gatherings. Pollination syndrome is a name given to a collection of different traits of flowers that tend to attract certain pollinators. These traits include a flower's shape, size, color, odor, and time of bloom. And why is this a big deal? Because it's important to include a variety of flower traits in your plantings to provide for the variety of pollinators that will be visiting your yard. So I'll point these out as we go through our fascinating list of Minnesota pollinators. I just thought, I'm so glad it's not Minnesota politicians. Sorry, I went off script. Another new term for me was nectar guides, sometimes referred to as pollen guides or floral guides. I thought this was fascinating. These guides are markings or patterns on the flowers that help guide insects to their nectar or pollen more efficiently. I just kind of figured they knew where it was, but there's actually pollen guides, nectar guides. So it makes pollination more efficient for both the plant and the pollinator. Here are a few examples. Passion flower. Pretty obvious, the bee is going to be guided right into that center. By the way, this is a picture of my passion flower. Just saying, I'm just bragging a little bit there. Oh, I don't have time, but if I have time at the end, I'll tell you my passion flower story. Anyway, and then we have St. John's wort, which of course you can see the center there. Yerba de lobo, the petals point in, plus the center button is a what was the fancy word, nectar guide, Queen Anne's lace. Every one of those little petals on Queen Anne's lace or even on yarrow, each of those is a single flower. And in the center, easily found, and those are covered by pollinators. Rabbit tobacco was very easy to see. And anise hyssop, the pollen guide on that is simply that many of the, especially the butterflies, like to have tubular flowers for getting their proboscis in. And so the tubular flowers are kind of their pollen guides. So those are different kinds of pollen guides. Once again, something fun, if you remember this, which I'm sure you will, to have kids look for when you walk this summer. It's really fun to look for those pollen guides. Here's one you won't be able to find, another fascinating tidbit of information. Did you know that many insects and birds see an ultraviolet light? Oh, nothing there yet. This allows them to see nectar guides that are invisible to us humans. A flower that appears to us as a solid color can actually have a prominent two-tone bullseye at its center when seen in UV light. Get this one, evening primrose. That's what we see. Everybody recognize that? Well, anyway, that's an evening primrose. This is what they see. That is what you see with ultraviolet light, a distinct advertisement. Drink here. That is thanks to my technical support here. Let me introduce you to some of Minnesota's pollinators. First up is one that is, and I should let you know, there's probably about 10 more minutes of pollinators and then we'll get into the plants. But I just am so fascinated by the pollinators. So here you go. First up is the most commonly one we think of, the bee. Minnesota has over 400 species of native bees. You have likely noticed a rise in hobby beekeepers, perhaps in your own neighborhood, perhaps you. If so, I apologize for this paragraph. Note that honeybees are not native bees. My apologies to beekeepers here for this following information. Studies have shown that honeybees contribute to the decline of native bee populations, as honeybees are extreme generalist foragers and monopolize and outcompete native bees for pollen and nectar, simply not leaving enough food to go around. Also, honeybees are very effective at pollinating certain weedy species, which changes the overall plant communities and disrupts our native ecosystems. In contrast, native bees are very typically specialized foragers, foraging on just a few plants, and several are facing extinction due to their dwindling foraging sources. Okay, bumblebees. We're going to go to bumblebees, are important pollinators of both wild flowering plants as well as many agricultural crops. They are able, this was fascinating. This is, I just love this. They are able to fly in cooler temperatures, so that makes them very valuable, and lower light levels than many other bees, making them excellent pollinators. And they're able to perform buzz pollination. Have you heard of that? Another new term, which involves the bumblebee grasping a flower in their jaws and vibrating their wing muscles to dislodge the pollen. You can see the pollen going there. All it's doing is shaking that flower to get the pollen out. Is that fascinating or what? Many plants, including a number of wildflowers, but I also know plants, I know tomatoes and such, different vegetables have to have buzz pollination. They're actually coming up with a robo bee for doing this buzz pollination to plants because of the bumblebee population is. We need to save our bumblebees. Okay, I'm in a different paragraph. Many plants, including a number of wildflowers, benefit from this buzz pollination. Because they are indeed essential pollinators, the loss of bumblebees will have far-ranging ecological consequences. So here are a few of the commonly recorded native bees in Minnesota. We picked out some of the prettiest ones and some of them with the most interesting names. The black and gold bumblebee, the pure green sweat bee, two-spotted longhorn bee, flat-tailed leafcutter bee, the great northern bumblebee, the brown-winged striped sweat bee, that's a good one, unequal cellophane bee. I don't know if there's an equal cellophane bee, but that's an unequal cellophane bee, red-belted bumblebee, the pugnacious leafcutter bee, tricolored bumblebee, the burrowing resin bee. That's just some of the 400 and whatever native bees. And then of course, our Minnesota state bee, the rusty patched bumblebee, which is on the endangered list. Bee pollinated flowers. The rusty patch bumblebee is why I got particularly interested in pollinators, because they are in, well, they're in my yard. You'll see in a bit. Bee pollinated flowers are as diverse as the many bees that visit them. Regarding that pollination syndrome I mentioned earlier, bees are generally attracted to flowers that are white, yellow, blue, purple, and in the ultraviolet end of the color spectrum. Yes, bees see in the UV light spectrum. Nectar guides are often present to attract and guide the bee directly to that nectar supply. The flower shape is usually shallow with a landing platform because the bumblebees are rather heavy and need strong flowers that can hold their heft. The pollen on the flowers is usually heavy and fairly sticky, so it can stay attached as the bees move between flowers. That pollen is very important to bees because the adult bees will collect it to feed their young as well as consuming it themselves. The flowers usually have a pleasant odor as bees are attracted by pleasant scent. For those of you who are interested in learning more about bees, I have an electronic handout that is on, Marine's going to put it on the chat of the Zoom, and then we can send it to the rest of you even here yet tonight, but I have an electronic handout that you can click. And one of the handouts, this is so, you can print it out and have it with you, let your kids look, a guide to the Minnesota bumblebees. I used this a lot last year as I was getting to know the bumblebees in my yard. And another chart, more than bumblebees, right there telling you what the different bees are by the U of M Bee Labs. And there's a link to it on that handout. The U of M Bee Lab is an excellent resource for learning all kinds of stuff about our local pollinators, but also how to support them. Excellent, excellent website. Okay, while bees are most often thought of in regard to pollination, studies have shown that their less fuzzy relatives, our wasps, are also good pollinators. And in some cases, they even step up and pollinate plants when bees are absent. From an evolutionary standpoint, bees are simply wasps that have adopted a vegetarian diet. Did you guys know that? That was new for me too. Bees are vegetarian. They just eat the pollen and nectar, but wasps are, anyway, omnivores. That's coming up. When you think of wasps, you probably think about trying to enjoy food or drink outside on a warm fall day and being bothered by yellow jackets. Maybe you think of getting stung. These experiences are common and make it easy to disregard or disdain a class of insects that do Minnesotans a lot of good. But most of the wasp species in Minnesota are not aggressive and actually serve as beneficial insects in the landscape. Wasps, as omnivores, do us all a great service as predators, spending most of their time looking for insects like aphids, thrips, caterpillars, flies, grasshoppers, and many more to feed their young or to lay eggs on as a food source for the emerging larvae. In this way, wasps are invaluable in keeping insect populations in balance and managing pests. That's something I've learned a lot about wasps on the farm that I have the You Pick Medicinal Herbs garden at, because they have actually gotten wasps in to help with insects. Wasps are very important to gardeners. Wasps do not pollinate flowers to the extent that bees do, as they're smooth bodied and lack the pollen trapping hairs found on most bees. However, they provide some pollination as they visit flowers to consume that energy-rich nectar as well as pollen, and then carrying and dropping some pollen grains as they move along flowers. So everything is just kind of not hit and miss, but they're all important. Here are just a few of the wasp species in Minnesota who serve as pollinators. These wasps, every one of them lives solitary lives and do not defend territories or nests like their paper wasp cousins do. Listen to some of the names and you'll know which insects they take care of. The great golden digger wasp. Now this rather large, it's pretty good sized, harmless wasp has golden hairs on its head and thorax, which trap and move pollen from flower to flower. So that one carries a little more flower. It's a great pollinator. Then we have the American pelicanid wasp. I just thought that was a cool name, but that's a really pretty, I have seen that one. It's pretty small. You wouldn't think of it as a wasp, or definitely not as a pollinator, but it's cool. A potter wasp, I think simply because of the way it makes its nest. A four-banded stink bug. Okay, get this one. A four-banded stink bug hunter wasp. So they hunt stink bugs. So we like those. Stink bug hunter wasp. fraternal potter wasp, a black and yellow mud dauber for how they live, a spider wasp. You can just guess what they eat. Echnumenoid wasp, the great black wasp. Is that one up there? The great black wasp there? That is a picture I took last summer. I was going to say hundreds, but maybe about, well, tens of those on my yard. And I was kind of concerned about it. And that's when I asked the people at my farm about it. And they said, no, those are really good wasps. They encourage those. So I did. I walked in them all the time. I imagine they have a stinger because they're a wasp, but they're not going to be aggressive. They were around me all the time in the yard and I was never stung. I get stung a couple times a summer with bees, and that's only because I just don't know where they're there and I get in their way. They don't get in my way. Mason wasp, a braconid wasp, and a thread-waisted wasp. Aren't those fun names? If you do get stung by a bee, by the way, we learned this from a beekeeper relative decades ago. If you have bleach, put some bleach on it. It takes care of it. It's really good. Or plantain. Plantain is what I use now. Yeah, I'm sorry. Plantain. If we're talking herbs, the answer must be plantain, but let's just say bleach works too. But plantain is a lot. Actually, plantain, the sting will stay away. With bleach, you have to put it on over and over. Okay, so next up are the beetles. No, not them. I'm talking about Coleoptera, the order of insects characterized by having a biting mouth and two pairs of wings, and the outer pair being hardened and meeting in a straight line down the center. So have you thought of beetles as pollinators? Yes.
Before you get too far.
Yeah.
What about hornets?
I don't like them. You know, I don't know. How are they? They're really mean. I saw nothing in my pollinator stuff about hornets. I didn't think about that. Interesting. Do you know anything?
I don't.
Oh.
Except we have quite a few of them around our cabin in Wisconsin. So
you know, I'm going to look into that actually. Are there any native hornets or are they all aggressive? Yeah, and paper wasps are aggressive, obviously. And hornets, I don't know. That's a good question.
Okay.
I would kind of put them in that same family as wasps. But we didn't see any names, did we, Carrie, of hornets?
Okay.
Oh, that makes me cringe. Okay, this is interesting. Fossil records suggest that beetles were the first pollinators of flowering plants, visiting plants 150 million years ago. Beetles are not typically thought of as pollinators, but the adult beetles pollinate in the process of eating the plants themselves or their pollen, rather than sipping their nectar, and are often referred to as mess and soil pollinators because they often eat the flower petals and defecate in the flowers themselves, which I've seen. But in the process, pollen becomes trapped on their bodies and spreads between flowers as they feed. And they can be some pretty beneficial pollinators. They're typically attracted to flowers that are dull white or green with no nectar guides. For some reason, that seems good, typical for beetles. If there is an odor, it is likely to be strongly fruity or fetid. If there is nectar, it's not hidden but readily accessible with ample pollen. The shape of the flower is typically large and bowl-shaped like a magnolia, or small and clustered as in bone set. Here are a look at a few of the Minnesota beetles that serve as pollinators. So we have ourselves the blister beetle, the yellow velvet beetle, the red and blue checkered beetle, silver flower longhorn beetle, the goldenrod soldier beetle. This is one that there are thousands of them in the medicinal herb garden at Open Hands Farm. And I thought, oh no, we've got some horrible beetle here. And they said, oh no, that's one of their favorite pollinators is this goldenrod soldier beetle. And it was thick. I'm trying to see, nope, that's not the one that was from my bone set was just thick with those beetles. That was the goldenrod wedge-shaped beetle, the flower longhorn beetle, and the firefly. Nothing makes a summer evening magical like fireflies, also known as lightning bugs and glowworms, but they are neither flies nor worms. Fireflies are beetles. You probably know that their tails contain chemicals and enzymes that, when sparked with oxygen, create a bioluminescent reaction. We see a yellowish flash in Minnesota, but different parts of the country's species glow green, orange, or blue. About that, didn't know that one. In addition to their spectacular nighttime displays, however, oh, now hold on. Uh-oh. Technology problems, but we're good. We'll give them a minute. Oops. You want to see this next one? Let me tell you. We'll get it somehow. We lost Zoom on our technology. We'll get back up here. Does anyone have any questions or comments at this point while they get fireflies back up? Because this is a really cool screen that we're getting.
So when all those beetles show up all over the plants, so they're not nibbling on the plants, or they are?
They are, but they're pollinating. The flowers can easily lose petals. That doesn't hurt the flower at all. And the beetles are pollinating. The most important thing is to get those, the only purpose that a plant has in their life. I'm going to move out of the way so they can talk about how to get this going. The only purpose really for a plant, for a flowering plant, is to reproduce. And so insects pollinating in the process of eating their petals does not bother them, as long as they can still make food by sunlight and water. It doesn't bother it. Yeah, the protective chemicals on the plants. Yeah, the only problem really with like the soldier beetles on all of the bone set and such is just you have to make sure you shake them off before you make medicine. So many, wasn't it fascinating? Yeah, did everyone here get these magazines by the seed catalogs? Let me make sure we get those out while did we get it? Oh, we got it back. There we go. Okay, fireflies. In addition to their, we're back to fireflies here, right, Carrie? In addition to their spectacular nighttime displays, however, fireflies are also, I'm just making you wish for summer, are also beneficial pollinators due to the adults. With diets, this is interesting to adult fireflies. Their diets consist of pollen and nectar, and fireflies play an important role in the propagation of many flowering plants. And their larvae are equally helpful eating invertebrate pests like snails, slugs, worms, and grubs. So fireflies are good all around. So it's good to provide vegetation for daytime shelter for these fireflies, such as tall grasses or low flowering plants and shrubs, or even, this is a good excuse, mowing the lawn less frequently so that you have a little longer grass for them during the day. They like to be near the ground during the day. An interesting fact you too can share at outdoor parties this summer is there are 15 different species of fireflies in Minnesota. Okay, while monarchs and swallowtails, oh, isn't that cool though? I love fireflies. We're getting back to the thing. Any other comments that were, whoa. Oh, don't you just love Zoom? I'm letting Carrie find his way back. We're gonna go to the PowerPoint. Okay. While monarchs and swallowtails are probably the most well-known, Minnesota is home to around 160 species of butterflies. As adults, butterflies consume nectar from flowers as well as sugar from sap and fruit. So they're not big on the pollen itself, but the nectar. Most butterflies pollinate flowers that produce lots of nectar because that's what they need, such as the native milkweeds and such, which is also a well-known food source for monarch caterpillars, of course. So if you want to maximize the population of butterflies visiting your garden, you should also provide food plants for the caterpillars, often different from the nectar plants of the adults. Butterflies lay eggs on host plants, which is the vegetation they ate as caterpillars.
All right. Pause for technical.
Are we pausing for technical? I am just going to update here. I am following a script pretty much because I do have this wonderful PowerPoint that we're going to get going here. But please feel free to interrupt. I'm very interruptible. But then you'll notice I go back to my script because my technical support really has done a really good job on my PowerPoint. I cannot take, are we good?
Yep, we're good.
Okay, butterflies, over 160 species. Okay, butterflies are attracted more than the flower shape than by specific colors. I thought that was interesting. Butterflies have to land when they feed, so they need a steady, strong platform to land on and tubes filled with nectar to sip with their long tongue-like proboscis. In getting the nectar, the butterfly disturbs the pollen, which is carried on its body and limbs to the next flowers. Nectar guides, like the examples we saw earlier, are often present to attract and guide the butterfly to the nectar supply. I realized in studying that a lot of pollination has to do with efficiency. The more efficient the flowers can get the pollinators to be, the better chance they have of being pollinated, the better chance they have at reproducing and living. So that's really a big thing with the pollinators. They visit flowers of many colors and can actually see more colors than humans. But favorites tend to be yellow, orange, red, pink, and purple. Do you ever wonder how they can tell that butterflies see more colors than humans? I wonder things like that. Some of these, it's a survey, they do a survey. Some of these delicate and beautiful Minnesota pollinators include, the black swallowtail. Love that one. Painted ladies love zinnias. That should be on a t-shirt. The great spangled fritillary, the monarch, of course, the European skipper, the orange sulfur, the eastern tiger swallowtail, and the summer azure. All beautiful. But then did you know that Minnesota is home to around 1,000 species of moths? Many types of moths work the night shift. Consequently, moth pollinated flowers tend to be less colorful, usually pale, dull, purple, pink, or white, appearing to glow as they reflect moonlight. Since the flowers open at night, nectar guides are less important. Instead, they emit a strong, sweet smell to attract the moths. Flower shape is typically regular or tubular without a lip, as many moths will hover as they feed, so flowers don't need to have a place to land. Like butterflies, moths are after the large supply of nectar in the flower. I'm off script. Have any of you been around some of the night bloomers? That this Nicotiana or an orange tiger lily, I guess not a night bloomer, but it's really scented at night. The one scented hosta and such. At night in our back porch, I would sit and you're just overwhelmed by how wonderfully scented the flowers are. So if you can find some night bloomers and put them where you sit in the evening, it's just heavenly.
It's like they just turn up the volume on the smell.
Oh, it's like the smell machine got turned on full. It's just, and it's not a stink at all. It's perfume. I hope so. Bats are good. There are bats that are pollinators, but not Minnesota bats. I don't know how they figure that either, but in other parts of the world, bats are considered pollinator, tropical parts, but not in Minnesota. Our bats don't eat off flowers, I guess. Not all moths are nocturnal. Oh, did somebody have something to say?
Well, I mean, it's great for the bats, but I mean, the bats will eat the moths, right?
Yeah,
Unfortunately.
but they also eat the mosquitoes.
Oh, yeah.
Anything that eats mosquitoes is a friend of mine.
What's the moth that looks like a bat?
Oh, you're thinking good. Just you wait. Not all moths are nocturnal. Some feed at dusk while others visit flowers in daylight. Here are a few of the Minnesota moths. Minnesota moths. Wouldn't that be a great name for a sports team? Should do that. That serve as pollinators. Now moths, their caterpillars do eat things that we might wish they didn't, like the celery looper, the leafy spurge hawk moth, the white line sphinx, the grape leaf skeletonizer. Yes, that one eats the grape leaves. And the hummingbird clearwing. The hummingbird moth is often confused for a bird of the same name. Years ago, I saw the hummingbird clearwing moth. I would almost say hundreds, but it was close to 100 one time on a strip, probably as long as this room. They were just on the flowers. I thought it was hummingbirds, and a neighbor said, I think it's a moth, so I had to go look it up. Hummingbird clearwing. That is a milkweed, it looks like. Swamp milkweed, that looks like a milkweed. Yeah, absolutely beautiful. Which brings us to the hummingbird, which is not a moth. It is a bird, the smallest bird in Minnesota. It's the only species of the hummingbird common in Minnesota is the ruby-throated hummingbird, which is, like I said, the smallest bird, typically reaches about 3 inches in length. Do you guys see those? If you have flowers, you probably see hummingbirds. Oh, so good. Let's chat a little bit about them. The males show up a couple weeks before the females to scope out their territory, and they will start showing up the first week of May, making that the best time to put out your feeders. Then they start their migration back south the end of September, but continue to supply your feeders till the end of October because there's usually some stragglers. I read several places it's the teenagers that just don't catch on, but there are usually stragglers too. If you want to attract hummingbirds to your yard, the best thing to do is plant tubular flowers like bee balm or salvias and sages, which are favorites. They like that funnel shape to hover over. Flowers native to Minnesota are best, but non-invasive garden flowers and cultivars are also acceptable for the hummingbirds. They're not as picky. You could consider putting up a red hummingbird feeder, which works well, especially if you have planted with some of their favorite flowers. You'll often see hummingbirds gathering nectar in the open from flowers and feeders, but they need denser cover for roosting, and they build their tiny cup nests along branches of trees and smaller shrubs. This is a picture I took of a hummingbird nest in a wooded area near us. Teeny, teeny, tiny. So watch if you're out with kids too. If you know there's hummingbirds around, watch for those little nests. Just fascinating. So cool. Yes.
I always feel guilty kind of putting my hummingbird feeder next to the window and feeding them sugar water. It's like, oh.
The nectar in the plant is pretty much sugar. It's pure carbohydrates. The sugar water is great for the hummingbirds because they obviously burn up a lot of energy just by keeping themselves, the little wings. You know, they need a lot of energy. So actually, sugar water is fabulous. Don't ever feel bad about the sugar water. That's what they need to keep their energy up, and they will get what else they need for food elsewhere. But no, they really can use that sugar water. Don't put food coloring in. You know, they say get a red bird feeder and just use sugar water, 4 parts water to 1 part sugar, I think is what I do, something like that. But no, sugar water is not bad for them. Yeah, you know, we say don't eat sugar, but we'll feed it to our hummingbirds. But don't use honey because honey can go bad and that would hurt the birds. Sugar water, they need the energy. So it's not bad at all. It's really, really good for them. Or does anyone disagree? I guess I'm not an authority on that, but that's what from my reading, they really need a lot of carbs.
Well, I would.
And they don't eat ice cream, so.
I would think that high fructose corn syrup or, you know, sugar derived from corn would not be good for them. I would think that.
I would agree.
The syrup would be okay because it doesn't.
Yeah, would that go bad or not? Like honey, they say not to use honey
Never had.
because it could spoil. Oh, have you used honey in hummingbird feeders? You know, do your research, do what you want. I have fed sugar water for years with great success. White sugar, yeah, nothing fancy, but we have a young man here who says he uses honey. So, you know, do your research, see what you want for your hummingbirds. They will take any carbs you can give them, but they have to be able to get it with their probis. Is that what it's called on a hummingbird too? It has to become in a tube type thing for them to be able to hover and get their little beak down in it. So, so make sure you are supplying that for them either, well, in the flowers, that's the only flowers they can go to, and in the feeder. I have no idea. Does anyone know
I
that?
haven't seen a nest, but that's what they say.
They did what? Lichen and spider webs, they like spider webs. They collect it.
What I'm hearing, I don't know if you can hear on that hummingbirds use lichen and spider webs to make their nest. Having seen the hummingbird nest, that wouldn't surprise me. It was so delicate. Huh. Another fascinating thing to learn. Oh, you guys are going to keep me busy. That is fascinating. I can see it though. Wow. Okay. So as far as what flowers hummingbirds like, they need to have large reserves of nectar because they need a lot of carbs, as I said. While most insects can't see red, birds can. And the flowers that attract hummingbirds are usually found with bright orange, red, scarlet, and sometimes white coloring, and have large curved tubular flowers that allow hummingbirds to access the nectar with their long beaks. That's what we talked about. Birds do not have a sense of smell, so the flowers aren't necessarily fragrant. They're not attracted by smell. Okay, so our nearly invisible ecosystem service provided by pollinators is a precious resource that requires attention and support and is increasingly in jeopardy. Along with pollution, the misuse of chemicals, disease, and changes in climate patterns, pollinator decline is attributed most severely to a loss in feeding and nesting habitats. This is where herbalist gardeners help. I'll point at the people on Zoom too. We can all be a part of the solution by intentionally adding plants that benefit pollinators in our gardens, yards, and pots. The cool thing is that many of the plants also qualify as fantastic medicinal plants for people. Go figure, won't you? Okay, so now I am going to highlight some of the pollinator plants that also have a proven record as medicinal plants. I base the choices that I'm presenting on my own experience and research, as well as suggestions of several prominent herbalists. The specific plants that I feature tonight are ones that I grow myself in Northfield, which most of you probably know is plant hardiness zone 4. We're in that purple part by the 4. I have always told my kids someday, if they can't find me, I have moved to zone 6. I don't know where, I don't care where. I just want to live in zone 6 because you can grow everything there. Well, 9, I think there's more poisonous things that don't die. I like the winter to kill some poisonous things, but anyway, zone 6 seems really good. And the order that I'm going to present them is the bloom times in my gardens, as it's important to have flowers with nectar and pollen from as early as possible all the way through to as late as possible. So I'm going to start with the earliest ones and then continue on from there. Also, I want to say that this is being recorded. And so don't worry about getting every note down because I'm going to go rather rapidly. Yep, I am looking at the time. So don't worry about getting everything down. However, if you have had personal experience with any of these plants medicinally, please raise your hand, let me know. Comment on Zoom and Marina will get that to us. So if you have personal experience, not just something you read about, because, oh, I love reading, but if you have something personal experience, throw that in here too. Okay, here I go. Okay, first, let's look at the spring bloomers. Carrie, that's enough. He threatened that one. He threatened that one. White willows, we don't think a lot unless you have spring allergies. If you have spring allergies, you're already feeling it because a lot of the trees are pollinating. The willows, if you take a look at their flowers, what are they called? Catkins. So concentrated on the tree, they will be full of little, and that's one thing I really learned, our bees and such, some of them are those little teeny bugs that are on stuff. They will be covered with pollinators. They're so concentrated, and for these early pollinators that there isn't a lot out there. The willow trees and our early blooming trees are fantastic. Makes it easy for them to get the pollen between the flowers. And of course, medicinally, the bark of willow has been used historically for treating pain, headache, and many inflammatory conditions because of its salicylic acid, which is the active ingredient in aspirin. I admit I have not used willow much just because I use prickly ash bark instead. But willow is one of those important early pollinators. Now I'm going to deal with a couple early spring bloomers that, okay, he didn't go with that one, right? Where's it coming? Tell me if he shows anything I shouldn't know. Couple that I was surprised to hear about, dandelion, which is one of my favorite medicinal plants. I could do a 4-8 hour session on dandelion. I love that one, but it's actually not a preferred food source for pollinators, but it does help fill the gap when there aren't as many other flowers blooming. The important thing for pollinators is nectar that's rich in carbohydrates. There again, we're at that sugar water, which provides energy for the pollinators. That's the nectar. However, pollen is their only source of significant source of protein and is necessary for brood rearing and for normal development. Dandelion pollen is actually low in proteins and is considered a poor food source for pollinators. But then again, if there's nothing else blooming, at least they have the pollen from the dandelion. Junk food. Yeah. They have junk food. Dandelions are junk food. So, I mean, that's a good thing too in the spring after the winter. Now, I still welcome dandelions in my yard because they're one of my favorite medicinal plants. But I intentionally do grow other medicinal plants for the benefit of the pollinators, realizing that they need more than that. Along with dandelion, creeping Charlie is often visited by spring pollinators and is a source of nectar, but once again, the pollen is a poor source of protein. The other issue with creeping Charlie, and I mean, creeping Charlie is everywhere. It's one of the plants I try to not have grow in my yard as much. Everything else I don't care because my yard is all flowers. I have no grass. It's all pollinating flowers or medicinal plants. But creeping Charlie has been shown, you know how black walnuts send out poison in their roots. Creeping Charlie does the same thing and can kind of weaken the other plants in the area. So creeping Charlie is a wonderful medicinal plant. I love to use it as medicine, but as a pollinator, it's one I basically try to limit it in my yard because I do find that any other plants growing where the creeping Charlie is don't do as well. So do with that what you want. Not a great pollinator, can kill other plants, but it sure is nice too. I don't know. Anyway, medicinally, it's great. Pollinating wise, it's another junk food. Okay, so now I'm going to be going through a list of plants that are really good pollinators with a varying amount of each as the time constraints are here. While I've used many of the plants, most of them medicinally, I don't have personal experience with every one of them and will indicate that as we go. And like I said, if you have an interesting personal experience using any of them medicinally, please share that as we go along. That said, buckle up. Now we're getting into my passion. Do we have any questions? 8:30. Oh yeah, I still have a lot. I do mean buckle up. In fact, a little sip of kombucha would not be a bad thing right now. Yeah. 8:30 it is. Do we have to be out at 8:30? I'll be done with my presentation by 8:30, but so we don't have to, yeah, I mean, we can still chat. As you can tell, I love chatting about flowers. I love chatting about herbs. Okay, periwinkle is probably the earliest spring bloomer in my yard. I just had to see if you put the bloomer up there. I have not personally used it as medicine, but I've had people request it in the medicinal herb garden, so there's interest in it. And I've seen, because people were interested, I Googled to see what was up, and I see there's some benefit for persons with Alzheimer's. Anyone have experience with periwinkle? It's a good pollinator. It has a little more nectar than the others. Lungwort. I love lungwort. It has those beautiful tubular flowers. There are always pollinators in it. It's a longer blooming spring flower. It's a great plant. And as you can tell from the name, it has shown effectiveness historically. Yeah, I was thinking I said hysterically, with some respiratory issues, especially when there's excess fluid present. And yeah, it's a great pollinator. Violets are commonly used for calcifications in breast tissue and certain kinds of breast cancers. I have used it in that regard, but my primary use is the leaves as an early spring green, well, along with dandelion greens and mustards and such, and for garnishing salads. Now, granted, sample a few of the violet leaves before you put them in salad, because some aren't as tasty as others. So kind of pick and choose, make sure you like them before you feed them to guests or something like that. The flowering tops is what I have used. I'm not sure what's proper though, but it was sure pretty.
You use the flower tops for what?
For the lungwort. She was asking what part of the lungwort I use medicinally.
Oh,
And I think that's what I've used, but I don't know that I looked it up. Just look like for tinctures.
Yeah.
I have not ever made an oil out of that one. It seems like it could be slimy. It's kind of a slimy plant. Wild geraniums, great for pollinators. And what I like is they work in shady woodland spots. So if you have a shady spot where you can get, what do you call those? Well, Solomon seal, but the hostas and such to grow. You can get wild geraniums to bloom there, which is really cool. It was used medicinally by Native Americans to treat diarrhea. It's a drying plant as well as various mouth sores. I haven't used it medicinally, but I have lots of lovely patches in my wooded area. Anybody used wild geranium? It's one we could learn. A lot of these spring ones are kind of new to me. Well, we're coming up to more that I use. Golden Alexander. Golden Alexander is, oh, that's showing the flowers, but Golden Alexander is, well, I'm standing here so you can see I'm 5'3" and it probably comes, well, maybe about as tall as I am. Full of flowers, full of pollinators. I also belong to the wild ones in Northfield. And I was introduced to Golden Alexander for the pollinators. And it is just beautiful and stunning, full of pollinators.
The wild ones is not a motorcycle gang.
Oh, no, the wild ones is not a motorcycle gang. It's they're restoring prairies in the area. So I haven't, and just because of starting to grow it, I looked it up and it was used by Native Americans for medicine. Let me see what I found it. Parts of it are, okay. Sorry, we're going to have to research this one together. Native Americans are known to have used various parts of the plant for a variety of issues. So let's do some research. I have lots of plants. If you need some for your yard, you can come get some from me. Parts of it are also edible, but some parts are considered toxic. So do your research, just as I'm doing my research. I was just going to ask, do you know anything about
Well, I just
the Golden
think it
Alexanders?
looks like the wild parsnip.
It looks,
The horrible burn.
it does.
So it's just like-
It looks a lot like wild parsnip, except this one blooms early spring. Wild parsnip blooms later. So if you see an early spring bloomer, it's Golden Alexander. This one will be dyed back before the wild parsnip starts. The other thing is the blooms on one of them go up like this. And is that the golden? I always have to look it up in the spring. And the other one, the blooms go down. Is the way to differentiate. Because yeah, you do not want to get into wild parsnip. It's just not fun.
Very pain- I mean, I
Very
just had it.
painful. I have
Very
had it.
painful, so I was like, "Ooh, boy."
Years ago. I thought I must have cancer because of this awful thing on my leg, and it was wild parsnip. So yeah, one of them, I honestly, I went to the doctor figuring I had weeks to live, and it was wild parsnip burn. So yeah, one of them, the petals goes up, one of them it goes down, but this one blooms early spring. It'll be one of the first flowers blooming, spectacular. And then this kind of dies back before the wild parsnip. But yeah, if you see this in the summer, it's not Golden Alexander.
Also a host plant for the black swallowtail.
Is this one? Okay, it's a host plant for the black swallowtail. Thank you. I did not know that. I'm just getting to know it as a plant.
All that, they like it.
Oh, they love dill and parsley and carrots. They eat it.
Documented this too.
I'll be.
I use the dill. I like it.
Yes, yeah. You kind of like to have your vegetable plants saved for yourself. And I wish we could just tell the swallowtails, go to this plant. Well, that's good to know. So this is a good host plant too then for the caterpillars, we're saying, yeah. Excellent. Yeah, and Golden Alexander is just beautiful. Plant them in your yard. Wood betony is a late spring bloomer with beautiful tubular flowers that are definitely a favorite for the bumblebees and butterflies. They are just thick on it. It's also one of my favorites medicinally. I use it myself. I tend to hold tension in my stomach, solar plexus area, and have found wood betony to be invaluable with that nervous tension. That is, yeah, in the stomach area. So use it for that. Some people I know have used it for headaches with good success. Easy to grow, spreads nicely. You can divide it. Butterflies love it. So it's good for us. It's good for the pollinators. Also in the spring, just consider planting fruit trees and berries that flower like apple, plum, cherry, strawberries, raspberries, berries, anything with berries. Those flowers are great for the pollinators too. And the pollinators will help to give you the fruit. Next up, chives, a member of the allium family. Mine are always covered with pollinators. I don't think there's any on there, but they usually are. This perennial is very easy to grow in full sun to part shade. And the nice thing is even after the flowers die back, the foliage stays nice all season long. So it's a nice accent to whatever you have planted. And the spring blooms are beautiful and edible. They're great to add to salads or stir fries. Medicinal uses are similar to the other alliums, such as onions and garlic, known for their antiviral and antibacterial properties. I've used the flowers, the tops there to make a tincture, but my favorite use is to take the flowers and infuse them in honey. It's delicious, it's medicinal, it's wonderful to put on bread, it's wonderful to add to all kinds of things. So make an infused honey with the tops. Or you could dry them. I know some people who come and pick them just to dry them for winter use. But another one of my favorites with the chives is to use it to make vinegar. It makes that beautiful purple vinegar that you can, I mean, it's pretty enough to use for gifts, I think. And it tastes great. So there you go.
Just the flowers and the honey?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yep, I kind of tear them up a little bit, and a lot of times people say to wilt them, or at least partially wilt them. I let mine maybe wilt for 24 hours, and then I put the honey over it. I've only had honey go back bad, not even a handful of times, once or twice that it's actually gone bad if something's been too wet. I make a lot of infused honeys. They're wonderful. And chives is a really good one that way. Okay, another early season pollinator, considered a lawn weed, but it's self-heal. Self-heal is considered native to North America, but according to the Minnesota DNR, it was introduced into Minnesota. It is especially attractive to hummingbirds. You can kind of see, bumblebees. You can kind of, bees. That's a new species. Bumblebees. You can kind of see the flower shape. I mean, it's just perfect for them. It is a common lawn weed, and it is a perennial that grows in sun or part shade. It is part of the mint family, so it spreads easily and rapidly through the roots. So keep that in mind if you plant it. Also referred to as heal-all, this was at one time considered a panacea for disease in general. Indeed, this plant has been used historically as a health remedy during pandemics, as it supports and balances the immune system and moves lymph. Medicinally, we use the aerial parts. I prefer using them when they're just coming into bloom. I think they're strongest then. Some specific uses that I've had success with include fresh or dried as tea for sore throat, tonsillitis, and gingivitis, which is kind of cool. It works well for that. Some friends of mine that have seasonal allergies have said that they drink the tea as soon as they start coming out. They start drinking the tea with the flowers, and that's helped a lot with their spring allergies. So worth a try, and it's right out there in the yard. Okay, we're going from spring into early summer. And we're going to start out with borage. Beautiful blue flowers, bee and butterfly magnet. They're wonderful. They bloom for a long period. And if a stalk is done blooming, I will just cut that off, add it to my compost pile, and it will keep blooming all season long. And there will be pollinators on it all season long. It's really cool. Another cool thing you might know is that the borage flowers taste like cucumbers, and they make a wonderful garnish like on salads or in drinks or whatever. They're really cool that way. When kids come to the garden, I have them sample borage, and I usually have them sample spilanthes. You got to come to my garden and sample spilanthes too. Another, if you have strawberries, plant some borage in with them. They're supposed to help the strawberries. I know it's supposed to help with bugs. They also theoretically improve the flavor and production of the strawberries. So plant some borage with your strawberries. Medicinally, borage's flowering tops have proven effective for adrenal fatigue and the lack of courage that can develop from that. I thought this was interesting. Recent research has determined that borage does indeed stimulate the production of adrenaline, which might account for the sense of well-being and courage that some people feel after nibbling on the plant. So, and it's a fun one to nibble on. So, okay, now another thing I learned, some plants from our wonderful state of Minnesota, some plants have earned the designation of pollinator superfood species from the Minnesota Board of Water and Soil Resources. This means that they are excellent at attracting pollinators, and they have pollen that is especially rich in amino acids or provide immune building properties so beneficial to the pollinator's vitality. So in the slides that follow, I have noted which of these medicinal plants are the pollinator superstars. I think it's interesting that the pollinator superstars start with the summer bloomers. I mean, it's when we have the most plants out there, but that's also when we have the widest variety of pollinators out there too. Okay, first of the pollinator superfoods, and feel free to introduce, because I know I'm really pushing information at you. Interrupt. Kombucha break.
Really good.
This is why I have a script. I'm telling you, I would only be on the butterflies by now if I didn't have a script. First of all, are we on to clovers?
Yeah.
Is that where I am? Okay. First of the pollinator superfood species to bloom in our area are clovers. Clovers of all sorts. attractive to bees and butterflies who use them as larval host plants as well as others. Now, the red clover blooms, we use kind of especially, I think, for medicine. Well, they're also just tasty and they're a great snack. When I'm weeding or gathering the blooms, they're wonderful just to snack on. But they're also great medicinally, proving a great support for our lymphatic system, efficiently opening up congested lymph. Red clover has also been used historically as a blood cleanser, and I have used it often for helping to balance hormonal levels, if you think menopause. I love teas, and I love to use the red clover flowers to make tea. I think they are just wonderful. Or pulled apart, adding them to salad and summer beverages. They're just great. And interestingly, the yellow sweet clover, melilot, is considered to be one of the top nectar plants for our pollinators, which is so kind of small, but it's one of the top nectar plants. Also used medicinally, although I admit I have not used it much. Anyone have anything to say about the
I
clovers?
do. Matt
Yeah.
Wood said that if you have breast cancer, that you should take red clover and it'll make all the cancer cells clump together into one thing instead of being all over your breast.
Okay, can they hear that on Zoom?
Maybe repeat the
Sorry.
question.
Okay, so what's your name? Can I,
See, Mary,
Mary C? Says that Matt Wood has said that if you take a clover blossom,
no, take the red clover.
the red clover.
Yeah.
Oh, tincture.
Yeah.
Red clover tincture internally,
Yeah, internal.
and it will help the
If you have
cancer
breast-
cells, breast cancer, to actually kind of go all together, clump together,
and much
I had
more
not
easier
heard
to
that.
treat. Yeah.
and much easier to treat that
yeah,
way.
you
I'm
can
just,
take out the
repeating her.
tumor instead of having it all over the breast.
so it's easier to remove the tumor.
Or it'll keep, with chaga, I suppose. it would
Yeah.
keep-
Interesting.
And SCIT.
Yeah, SEAT. My goal is to have all of the plants for the SEAC formula in the garden.
Oh, I'm coming to
I
see
have
it.
sheep sorrel, which you would think is the easiest to grow.
No, uh-uh.
That's the one I'm having trouble with, is getting sheep sorrel to grow, so.
It just grows where it wants to, doesn't it?
It does, but I want it to grow where I want it to grow. Right now, I'm trying to germinate it in a greenhouse. I think it's laughing at me. You should see the greenhouse full of medicinal plants that are growing. Oh, anyway, okay.
Do
my-
a video of it once and send it
Oh, I
to
should.
me.
I should. I'll put something on my website. Carrie has cleared his throat at me. He knows that I have to stick to the script. There's only so much time. Next, but feel free to interrupt. Back to the script. Next, purple coneflower is also a pollinator superfood. And it also serves as a butterfly larval host plant. So it's a really important one. Coneflower is a perennial that grows best in full sun, but is adaptable to part sun too. Now, the Echinacea purpurea is easier to grow in our area than the Echinacea angustifolia pictured below. Oh, there it is. And angustifolia goes down. Now, I do have both of them growing in our medicinal herb garden. So if you want to compare them, they are different. It's really fascinating to see and to feel the two different plants side by side. Here, though, I will say it is easier to grow Echinacea purpurea in our area. The purple native species is best. Now, if you've gone to greenhouses, garden centers, you can see lots of lovely coneflowers that are hybridized with all kinds of beautiful colors and multiple layers. Gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous. But studies have shown that when plants are hybridized, the medicinal part of them really goes down. So as far as medicine, I would encourage sticking to just the purple coneflower, Echinacea purpurea, or Echinacea angustifolia. I myself use all the different parts and I tincture them at their prime times and just keep adding to the jar as the season goes along, catching all the parts at their peak times, but that's because I have a lot of them growing. It is a well-known medicinal plant. It's good at alerting the immune system to invaders by actually mimicking the cell wall or blueprint of the invader. And so then it keeps the immune system on high alert. And so that's why you don't want to be using Echinacea all the time, because it will keep your immune system on high alert, and that's not good for the immune system. But if you know you've been exposed to the illness or something's going around, or at the start of an illness, it's a great one to take. What I have used it for myself, it's good for getting the sluggish immune system moving. I have Lyme. What's that?
Lymphatic.
I did that wrong every time we practice too. It's great for getting the sluggish lymphatic system moving. And I myself have Lyme, and when it's acting up, I will use Echinacea in combo with Spilanthes actually for my Lyme as one combo And the other off script, sorry about that, is teasel and lady's thumb. So it's my two combos that I use to keep my lime under
Teasel and
happy.
lady mantle?
Teasel and lady's mantle together for me work well. And then I alternate that ladies thumb and teasel. And then I alternate that with echinacea and spilanthes. There, I'm going to slow down my speech a little. That's what I find for Lyme, and I'm happy to talk with anybody about Lyme anytime. I've also heard, I've had one person try and I didn't hear mononucleosis, that it's really a pretty good go-to for mononucleosis. So,
Now I hear about it.
sorry.
Yeah, 60 years too late.
Okay, we're gonna go on to anise hyssop. One of my, if you're gonna make an infused honey, you've got to make it with anise hyssop. It is so good. Anyway, another pollinator superfood. And it's attractive to every single pollinator ever, it seems. I have it, I let it spread through my yard. They are filled with pollinators. And the nice thing about it, if they do, when they get spent, they're easy to snap off and they will keep blooming all season long. They are just wonderful. This is one that also does really good in pots. I wanted to give people that don't have ground to plant in, there's some options for pots. This one also does very good in pots. The circled photo is the rusty patched bumblebee. I've had several in my yard, but there's one that I got a picture of. I have a neighbor who is a biologist and came over and identified, so I would know it actually was a rusty patched bumblebee. That was on an anise hyssop patch in my yard. Medicinally, the leaves and flowers are used. It tends to be quite drying, but it's also, because of that, used in treating miserable summer colds with runny noses. I find myself that it's too dry for me to use in the winter. I do okay with a little honey, but it really dries me out, the tincture, or even using the dried leaves as a sweetener in the winter dry me out too much. So I avoid it in the winter, but all summer long, I use the leaves and the flowers for sweetener in my tea. Because it's humid enough in the winter, it balances it, or the summer, humid enough in the summer. It is so good.
Isn't that, that's kind of like the flip side of licorice. Tastes like licorice, but licorice is moist.
Yeah.
That is true. Yeah, licorice is moistening.
Yeah, but you can't.
This one is drying.
Yeah, but you
This,
can't tell it tastes different. You know?
No.
For me, I can't.
no, very true. My little dandelion club that I had, but it started out with about 10 and we ended up about 30, 35. But we would make infused water every the start of every time they'd have a jar, we'd make infused waters and they always put anise hyssop in. It was so much fun.
Now I know the difference between the two. Thank you.
Yep, there's anise. There is also anise and there's also hyssop plants. Hyssop is a wonderful pollinator too. We didn't put that in here, did we? But it's that one is covered also with pollinators, but you won't hear about it today, but it's really good. Bee balm, also sometimes called wild bergamot. I just call it Monarda because that's what I do, is native to the US and is part of the mint family. Another pollinator superfood, it attracts a wide variety of midsummer pollinators. In fact, this one's interesting. There is a small black sweat bee. I think, yeah, there it is. There's a small black sweat bee that collects pollen exclusively from Monarda fistulosa. It's the only food it eats. We need our pollinating plants. It's a perennial that grows in full sun to part shade and is a long midsummer bloomer. I've seen it quite often in ditches now and such too. It's used quite a bit.
Like I took a class with a herbal conference and so this botanist who talked about bee balm. She's like the red ones or the ornamental ones are as potent or as an antiviral. And it's maybe because it doesn't work with the pollinators, like it's not deep enough or like something. So I just think, oh, in a garden, it's important to have.
It is important. I think it's important to have, I think medicine wise too, they all act a little, there's several ones that are native besides the fistulosa. And I think they all are good medicine, but they all act a little differently.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting.
That's when they test it against viruses.
Yes, and there's another one. Let me see if there was anything I had to have here. Yeah, medicinally, well, the same on both of them. I use the upper plant when it's in flowers for tinctures, oils, and to dry. It's a remedy for intense burning type pains, such as urinary tract infections internally. But another thing I really like is to make an oil out of it. And I have, oh, I didn't bring it along. I burnt my ear. This weekend, we went to Kansas City. We took a grandson to the ball game down there and it's feeling better. But I can, if you want, go to my website and email me and I'll tell you what my blend is for sunburn. And I use Monarda oil is the main one I use in that to help with sunburn, and it's fabulous. It really works good. So it helps with burning of all sorts. But what I'm thinking about in relation to the next slide, this is Monarda fistulosa. And have you seen spotted bee balm, also part of the Monarda family? It grows in a little drier soil. It's so pretty. But from what I've read, I've just made medicine out of it last year and I didn't actually try it since then. So I should try it. But I've read that it works best in a drier tissue state also, which is interesting to me because it grows in a drier area too. And that is also a native Minnesota plant. So I would trust that one for medicine. Now, like the red bee balms and such that you can get for landscaping, beautiful for landscaping. And I think hummingbirds love them just fine because hummingbirds aren't that picky as long as there's a lot of nectar. But for our native pollinators, I would say to try to include, you need to have pretty, but also add, and for medicine and for our native pollinators, I really think the native Monarda is best. That's just my opinion. Do with that what you want. So blooming right alongside that bee balm and anise hyssop in my yard is yarrow. Summer, you all need to visit my yard and garden this summer. It's just gorgeous. Yarrow is, of course, an easily grown, sun-loving perennial that, despite its bitter taste to humans, is a popular pollinating plant. The white yarrow is native to our area. Of course, there's all kinds of beautiful colors. And in fact, I'm including some of those in my yard this year just because they're so knocked dead gorgeous. But the white is the one that we use medicinally. And it's the native one, the one that would be most beneficial for our pollinators. But I have a lot of white yarrow. I'm not worried about not having enough for them. If you need white yarrow plants too, come to my house. I don't sell them, I give them away. I'm not a good one for selling plants because I just think everyone should have them. So when I make medicine, I use the top 6 inches when the plant is flowering. To make both tinctures and oils, I use them a lot to slow bleeding, reduce bruising, lessen pain, typically present with those types of injuries. I use it a lot with my grandkids. I have told my daughter and daughter-in-law when we're finished a 2-3 hour stint of roller skating, just put a little in the bathtub and let them soak. It's great. Yeah, just because they've been bruised head to bottom. I mostly do that in fun, but I think they do that. But
Do you do it with the flower?
the flowering, the top 6-8 inches of the plant when it's just come into flower. Yep. And I use it for tinctures and oils. It's probably one of my top 5 of what I use. But do try to include some white in your yard for our native pollinators. Also great for concussion and to help old injuries as it breaks up long stagnant blood. Okay, now we're on to our vervains. We're moving on in the season. Vervains, both blue vervain and hoary vervain, are also pollinator superfoods. Both are midsummer bloomers, blooming a little later than yarrow and Monarda, but they often overlap, so you're getting that continuous flowering for the pollinators. Hoary vervain is also often used as a host plant for the caterpillars of butterflies and moths, so that's a cool one that way. I use the flowering tops of both as tinctures. As an herbal remedy, the vervains are nervines for calming the nervous system, especially for driven, out of balance, intense type A people. And it can also help with some types of insomnia, especially in relation to that. I've also used vervain for irritable bowel syndrome with good success. And I've read it can be useful for asthma, if asthma is kind of like that stress-related type asthma, that it can be good that. Vervains are perennials. They grow easily in full sun. The seeds spread profusely. This is a clump of hoary vervain that was between a lilac bush and the curb. So it had that hot street heat and sandy, yucky soil, and it just thrived. It helped, so we didn't have to mow there. I didn't use it for medicine then because cars parked right there, but it sure filled in nice and the pollinators still loved it. They loved that I didn't use it for medicine. Okay. Let's not forget the milkweeds. Yep. You can, the hoary vervain can grow anywhere. The blue vervain can grow in some good garden soil. It probably wouldn't grow as good in a dry sandy area. It grows really good where there is some moisture. But I also have it in my yard where there's not a lot of moisture, but it's also not super, super, super dry. I think the blue vervains like a little more moisture. Any opinions on that? I know mine, hoary vervain is everywhere in my garden and yard. And the blue vervain is a little more specific where it, in fact, I have blue vervain in more of a shady area too, maybe because it doesn't have that intense sun. But isn't blue vervain beautiful? So good. Even the neighbors have to like it. Okay, milkweeds. I'm going to go to pleurisy root, which is part of the milkweed family, also known as butterfly weed. This is one that I love when I'm working with plant sales for our wild ones. Plant sale. I push the pleurisy root. The orange blossoms are beautiful for landscaping. It's easy to grow. It reseeds. It can take dry areas. It can take wet areas. I love it. I love the orange part. The orange vibrancy. This one was passed on from Native Americans to European settlers in the 1700s. Herbalists know it as pleurisy root for good reason. It's used as a remedy for bronchitis and lingering pleurisy, or those fluids, fluid that sticks in the lungs. I've had milkweed sap help get rid of warts in many people. Yeah, it's great. Going to go on to sages, including our common garden sage and red sage. Does anyone else grow red sage? Oh, you got to come see that. Garden sage, you all know garden sage most likely. We're good herbalists. The red sage gets taller, really dramatic, and gets these beautiful purple, same as the little sage flowers, but these huge tubular flowers. Got to come to the garden in July and see the red sage in August. It is beautiful. Also a sage full of pollinators. Common sage, the garden sage, is considered a tender perennial, but what I've grown in the medicinal herbs garden has come back the last 3 years from the roots. I was just out there today. It was chilly today, and I don't see it coming back yet, but not much has come back yet. It's just been too cold. Same as the other culinary herbs like thyme and oregano, sage grows best in full sun to part shade, and it can also grow really nicely in pots. If you have it in a pot, you can bring them inside in the fall, have them for medicine and eating through the winter, and then take them back out. However, I admit I'm not really good at keeping herbs alive inside in the winter. And I have a green thumb, but inside my house gets too dry. Sage, I gather the aerial parts for making tinctures. I dry them for winter use. I put them in honey. Sage tincture was my go-to remedy for hot flashes. I mean, it just worked great. And for other people too, and then other people I've talked to who I don't particularly like the taste of sage, to eat a lot. And so I like the tincture, but some people who like sage just use it as tea for the same reason. But what I do a lot now is I make a sage infused honey where I just fill a jar half full with sage, put honey on it, let it sit. The family uses it. I use it, sore throats, winter stuff, just to taste good, just to have it on toast. Very, very good and very, very medicinal too. So our medicine can taste good. Okay, now I'm going to demo. Oh man, this is taking longer than practice, isn't it, Carrie? If I don't get through all of this, I am planning on taping it and putting it on my website, and I can let you guys know when that gets on there, because there's so much good information here, I think, that I just don't want you to miss. I'm going to show you how I think. And that's a scary thing. That is off script. How many of you know about lyre leaf sage? Oh, grab your catalog. If you're at home, you could pull it up. Lyre leaf sage is in your strictly medicinal catalog. Okay.
LuAnn, quick question.
Yes.
When you make a honey, do you strain out the plant material or do you eat that along with the honey?
If I'm going to gift it, I strain it just because some people might be turned off by the plant material in it, but I tell them that the flecks are good. That's just, part of the, you can't get everything out. But if I'm using it myself, I don't strain the plant material. I just eat it along with the honey. Even candied sage tastes good. Candied anisceus, candied elecampane root is like delicious. Candied onions and garlic. I do onion garlic honey. Very good. So yeah, I strain it if I'm giving it as a gift. Otherwise, I never strain it myself. I just eat the herbs with it. I can't think of anyone that I don't just eat the herb. Lemon verbena, I strain it because that's a lemon verbena honey is wonderful. And I do strain that because the stem stays kind of stemmy and I don't want to eat that on my bread. So just depends on how it tastes. Okay, okay, so first, lyre leaf sage. Carl Linnaeus, the father of difficult to pronounce botanical names for plants, christened this herb Salvia lyrata. The genus Salvia comes from the Latin word salvare, which means to save. All sages are in the genus Salvia, to save. They were that highly regarded as medicine and have been used for healing throughout history. Linnaeus gave this plant the specific moniker lyrata because the leaf shape resembles the Greek musical instrument, the lyre. Common names for lyre leaf sage include cancerweed, cancer root, meadow sage, wild sage, and pear leaf sage. Personally, I think lyre leaf sage has a more lyrical sound to it. Get it? Get it? Yeah. It just sounded so pretty. Oh, somebody just got it. Huh. Okay, lyre leaf sage, interesting fact, is the only sage native in the lower 48 states. So it is a native, not necessarily to here, but in the southern states, it is a native sage. Seeds are available both from Strictly Medicinal and Richter's, but I could not find it in Richter's, but it is on their website. So I'm going to give you a minute to describe what goes into my decision on plants to try in the You Pick Medicinal Herbs Garden. Okay, page 66 and Strictly Medicinal. Some of you who come to any of my stuff at the garden will probably have the catalog already. Page 66, lyre leaf sage. Does anyone see? Oh, top of the second column. Okay, this one says, let me go here. It reads, there's this and this one, the plant has. Okay, I think I took this one from the website. I love Strictly Medicinal, but they do give more information on their website than what they give in the book. So check the website too. So it's on page 66, but this is what on Strictly Medicinal on the website, it says the plant has cleft dandelion-like leaves with striking purple variegations. So the leaves sound kind of pretty. The attractive purple-blue flowers are elongated with characteristic dorsal ridge on a tall raceme. So that would also be pretty. And because of the type of flower it is, and because it's a sage, it's going to be good for pollinators. And then Richter's website mentions that lyre leaf sage will attract butterflies to the garden. And yes, indeed it does. Strictly Medicinal mentions the traditional use of lyre leaf sage root, leaf, and seed as a salve for healing wounds and treating abnormal growths. Curious? Richter's references the use of the roots by indigenous people for sores and mentions that lyre leaf sage tea has been used for colds, coughs, and nervous conditions. Richter's also points to the nickname cancerweed as an indication that it was a folk remedy for cancer. Intriguing. So then I go into, I think, okay, cancer, it's always kind of fun to try those. As far as growing it, lyre leaf sage grows in regular garden soils, particularly fond of growing in lawns. Well, is that good or not? It could be good because it coexists harmlessly with lawn grass. It's not going to hurt your grass. It thrives in full sun to part shade, grows to a height of 1 to 2 feet. Richter's describes lyre leaf sage as a hardy perennial for zones 6 to 9. So that's the first I saw. I thought 6 to 9, I don't know. But then Strictly Medicinal says it's hardy for zones 4 to 9, and we're zone 4. And pretty much I try anything that's zone 5. In fact, the red sage that's come back now for 4 years is a zone 7 or 9 and it's still come back. So I'll try most anything. Also, our medicinal herb garden is pretty magical. I will just say it. You've been there. Several of you have been there. It's pretty cool. But anyway, so I thought we're zone 4. So I figured it was certainly worth a try. And we are on year 4 and it's spreading enough through the garden that I am deadheading so that the seeds do not spread through the garden because it is getting invasive in places I don't want it in the garden. However, in my yard, which doesn't have grass, I am letting it spread anywhere it wants because it's a wonderful ground cover. And it does get 1 to 2 feet high, but I have read online and I can understand now that I have grown it and played with it, that you can even mow it and it's just fine. You can walk on it. It's hardy enough to walk on. So if you're looking for a ground cover, that's also medicinal. And then just this last year, I've been growing it for 3 years. And I heard Phyllis Light talking about how it grows wild where she is down in Alabama where she is. It's a native sage and she can find it all over. And she was talking about how the upper part is used more as an immune system type thing medicinally. And the root is used more for cancer or growth type thing. I'm so glad I started growing it. So anyway, I had hoped some years it's already coming up in the garden and my goal was to bring plants for each of you to take home, but it's not showing yet because it's been so cold. So you'll all have to visit the garden. Or maybe if I can make it to the plant share thing, I'll bring some there too. Because we have plenty to share, but it's a beautiful, it is that beautiful. It is a beautiful, beautiful plant. And the flowers are pretty and it's really cool. A little showy, but not that showy. It's just really, really nice. So anyway, that is how I decided to grow lyre leaf sage. Come to the garden and meet it. Okay, and we are at almost 8:30, aren't we? So I'm gonna just show us Joe Pye, Carrie, our late season pollinators. And I will put this on a recording that I will let you know when I have it up. We have Joe Pye, we have Bone Set, which is so wonderful, filled with pollinators, absolutely filled with pollinators in the fall, but also so good for pandemic, for influenza, for setting bones, go figure. It's great. I'll put that all. One that I have not used medicinally, but Jim McDonald does a pretty good write-up. And so I have aster growing in my yard. Oh, goldenrod. I forgot. Goldenrod is wonderful. I have to tell you about goldenrod because, well, goldenrod is just great. I think we all know that. It's great for the pollinators. Cat allergies, Carrie uses it. If we visit someone with cats, he takes a few drops to be able to last a little longer before being miserable. Yeah. Before, yeah, he will when we come home. Like I tell him, if he doesn't want to stay long, he doesn't have to take it. And then he gets miserable enough looking, we can leave. So, but yeah, it helps. And then when he gets miserable, we leave and then he takes them when he gets home and it works. It works, right?
What's the thing on Jim McDonald you were saying?
Asters. And I am going to use, I'm coming up to that. So don't worry about, I forgot goldenrod. The other thing I'm going to tell anybody that likes green tea, make a tea with the goldenrod flowers. It tastes very similar to green tea, but it's all the people who test things say the antioxidant level is much higher than green tea. And it's free. You don't have to buy it. It's local. However, if you're going to dry it as it's almost coming into flower, because if you wait till it's in flower, you will get, yeah, poof. I found that out. I opened the bag and poof, it's just puffballs. So if you're going to dry it before it flowers, just as it's coming into flower so that you can keep, but it is a lovely tea. I find if I don't steep it too long, if I steep it too long, it becomes more like a weed taste, but oh, it's so good. So good. That's the main thing I wanted to say about goldenrod. I use it a lot medicinally. We all should. Not that I'm judging. Okay. And then there's asters, which I have not used medicinally. Jim McDonald has written up some really interesting stuff about it. So I am going to work on that this fall to learn it. And let's just see what it does. What's that?
The latest.
Tell me again. Oh, and this is the reason I wanted to include it is this is anyone who gardens and has asters knows that this is the last blooming plant in the garden. When everything else has died or has gone, the flowers, the aster is still blooming. And that's, even though I haven't used it medicinally, for the pollinators, asters are really important for your landscape. And that is why I included aster here. So let's put it in. It's a good medicinal plant. Let's see what it does, Carrie. What Jim McDonald said is it helps with gas pains, the tea, stomach aches, fevers. He talked about it. What was the next thing? Yeah, he said that it has a bit of a sedative effect, not as strong as valerian, but a little bit of a sedative effect. And was there one more? Yeah, decongest. He said you could feel it, a kind of decongestant loosening up for the lungs, which I thought was interesting. But that sedative effect. So we should all work on that one this fall and then share what we come up with because it is, I think it's essential for those late season pollinators. It's the latest blooming one. And I suppose we should stop. I will, what, Carrie? whip through it. Okay, can I go 5 more minutes? Okay.
Yeah, you can take a few.
I got this done like in an hour and 10 minutes at home. Go figure. I must have talked really fast. Okay. Other ones that are great for blooming for pollinators and medicine. My favorites for medicines, my favorite for pollinators, mullein. I could talk an hour on mullein. Full of pollinators, great medicine, every part. New Jersey tea. Oh, if you have any spot in your landscaping, it is a beautiful landscaping plant packed with pollinators. The root is a wonderful lymphatic. Tulsi is my favorite tea plant, well, along with a lot of others, I guess. But Tulsi grows really easy, just like basil. And I never keep mine deadheaded to keep the flowers down, so it's full of pollinators. What's that?
New Jersey and Tulsi, do they need the sun?
They do better in sun, but they could do part sun. They could do part sun. Yep. Thyme, oregano are culinary herbs also when they're in flower are full. Meadowsweet, I have bloomed well for the first time this last year. Beautiful, beautiful flower. And that is a plant that today I saw is starting. I had trouble getting meadowsweet to take, and it is back already now. It's coming up. So I know it made it through another winter. So meadowsweet is in my garden. Lavender, don't have to talk much about that. Wild roses, linden trees, full of pollinators, such good medicine. The sumac, the red sumac, white is poisonous. Don't use white sumac. Red sumac, make lemonade out of it, use it as medicine. Dill, also a great host plant, the dill and carrots for the swallowtails. Mints when they're in bloom, and many, many more. Also listed online and in good reference books. I don't think we should do this next part, Carrie. I have a few tips for making your own herbal garden. I will put those, I will let you know when I have that to put on a slideshow. Okay, so at the beginning of the presentation, I said my goal was to encourage you to think about growing plants that attract and support pollinators, that are useful for herbal remedies and enhance the beauty of any landscaping. This landscaping with herbs, some of you have heard me teach an herbscaping class. I love teaching what you can do with herbs. That is also beautiful. So I think Carrie's probably flipping through. These are some landscapes. This is a zigzag goldenrod. They have several native goldenrods available at Prairie Moon Nursery. This is one of them. This was in my neighbor's house, zigzag goldenrod with aster. So that was late season. There's borage in front of a fence. Pleurisy root blooming with some blue butterfly delphinium, which is not medicinal, it's poisonous, but it sure is pretty. Oh, this one is red, is the pleurisy root along, and the bin back is in this catalog. It is fringe pink dianthus. That is a dianthus that is medicinal. It is in this.
If something is poisonous, it's gotta be medicinal.
It is. Everything is edible at least once.
Well.
I learned that from a mushroom person. Yeah, I mean, and even the ones that we would consider toxic are medicine to some extent, even possibly as a homeopathic. But it's not one that I would use free, as freely as others. But the dianthus you saw, and there's a fringy, it's come back for 3-4 years now, and it's beautiful. It gets tall and it's really nice. So yep, Solomon seal I didn't talk about, but it's great to grow. And there's just showing how you can put your coneflower in with your landscaping. California poppy is another. That was mentioned in a lot of pollinator books. It spreads beautifully. It's so pretty. That is Joe Pye before it bloomed. It's almost to the top of my window. So that's a tall one, but it's beautiful. That's passion flower at my house. It's by the middle of the summer. It's blooming and it's touching the top of my roof. Mullein is impressive, of course. It's a landscaping plant. Where can I learn more? Okay, there's a few books I found helpful. I'll have these on my presentation when I put it on the B book. Pollinator Friendly Gardening, Attracting Native Pollinators and Pollinators of Native Plants. I love teaching kids because I figure someday those kids will be adults taking care of me. So for kids, a couple really good, that flower talk was really fun. And I will put those in I guess this is being taped too, so you can get those later. Of course, you can find all sorts of information online and on the electric handout their electronic handout. There are clickable links to some of my favorite sites. If you want to meet some of these plants this summer, the pollinators, visit me at the UPIC Medicinal Herb Garden, where I'm currently cultivating around 120 different medicinal plants, along with the other local wild growing herbs. You can check my website, Cannon Valley Herbals, for more information about visiting. It's at a working CSA farm, so you do have to have me. I don't live there. I'm about 2 miles away. I'll meet you anytime, but they're busy with the
Is that your
farm.
website?
This is my website, cannonvalleyherbals.com. Be sure to do herbals or you get a different website, and it's fine, but she's not as good as my website because he takes care of my website. But also on that website, I post what's growing. I post what you can see what I have planted. You can see during the season, I will put down what's ready to gather, what's ready to be used for making medicine. So, so you can plan that way. I also have a list right now of plants that I know that I will have transplants. This is our 4th growing year in the garden. And so the plants are spreading. And so I will have a lot of plants to share with anyone who wants. I think the best thing an herbalist, if you have the space and the interest, can do is grow your plants, to know your plants and make your medicine. If you can't grow your own, visit somewhere and make your own medicine. If you can't do that, come see me. Simple as that. But I will be giving away plants. Another great resource, the Herbalist Guild, of course, and they have on the website, they have a list of learning opportunities. I think the best way you can learn is in person, getting to know the plants. Nothing as good as in-person classes. I do offer in-person classes down in my area. So if you live around there, check the website for that, and plant walks. Do a lot of plant walks through the libraries, different libraries in the area. Also on the website, I've posted some instructional videos and demonstrations and such things, especially through COVID. Well, I was scheduled to teach classes and couldn't, so I just started doing them online. And I also have a blog where I post current and relevant to me information on a variety of topics, whatever I think is good. Also something new, this is new. You're the first people to hear this. I'm offering new for 2022, Herb Garden 2.0. If you are finding yourself short, this is my one advertising blurb. I do not like to advertise me, but this is cool. If you are finding yourself short on time for making your own tinctures or infused oils, or have limited space for drying plants, or perhaps will be on a nice vacation during peak harvesting times for your favorite herbs, I am offering my services along with my friend Marcia. She has this perfect space for drying herbs. And she said I do not like drying herbs. That's way too much work. But she loves it. So I said, if people want dried herbs, would you do that? And she jumped at it. So we will happily help you out. You can check this page on my website where I'm just starting to get information on it about that. It might be just what you need. Always contact me with any questions. I'm happy to talk on the phone, email. I have contact information up there. Let me leave you with this encouragement. It's time to plant. This year, add to your landscaping and pots some easily grown medicinal plants that are also wonderful sources of food for our native pollinators. Become part of the solution to our rapidly declining population of pollinating insects by including pollinator-friendly plants in 2022. Your garden can be not only medicinal, but also beautiful. I had to get that in. Any questions?